Well, this is the Q&A podcast, and I'm your host, Peter Slen. Thanks for joining us. Starting shortly is our conversation with Congressman Jim Clyburn, Democrat from South Carolina. He is the 9th African-American congressman from South Carolina and the only one in the 20th and 21st century and the only Democrat. Our conversation with Congressman Clyburn begins shortly. Robert Smalls was born into slavery in antebellum South Carolina. By the time his life ended, he had stolen a Confederate ship, recruited thousands of former slaves to the Union cause in the Civil War, met Abraham Lincoln at the White House, and served in the South Carolina state legislature and as a U.S. congressman. He is one of 8 Republican African-American members of Congress from South Carolina during Reconstruction. Congressman Jim Clyburn, the sole Democrat, was first elected in 1992, and in his book, The First 8, he tells the history of Reconstruction in his home state and the stories of the 8 congressmen who served during Reconstruction. Our conversation with Congressman Clyburn begins now. Congressman Jim Clyburn, who were the Corsairs?
It's a small group of young men who wanted to form a club at the high school that I taught at C.A. Brown High School in Charleston. And they came to me one day and told me they wanted to have this little club, but that the school would not allow them to operate unless they had a faculty advisor. And they asked would I be their advisor. Now, 2 or 3 of them were in my class, my history class. So I agreed, and they started meeting in my apartment. My late wife and I had an apartment before we built the house, and they would have their meetings in their apartment, and she would fix little meals for them, and we got to be very close. And I talked them into turning themselves into a tutorial club, and they began to tutor other young people in the school who may not have been as studious as they were, and they became a part of my life and still are. James Gadsden, who went on to become ambassador to Iceland. I still stay in touch with him. He lives right here in the Washington area now. Ralph Dawson, he and I talk almost weekly. And these guys were in the 10th grade when they first came into my life. I was a 22, 23-year-old world history teacher, and I'm now every bit of 85.
And we should mention that Jamie Harrison was one of the Corsairs as well.
No, he was not a member of the Corsairs.
Oh, he was not?
No, Jamie came into my life a little later. Jamie was a high school student in Orangeburg when he walked in. And I've been trying to get rid of him ever since.
And of course, he was chairman of the Democratic Party for a couple of years. Where did the name Corsairs come from?
I never knew. Those guys looked it up, told me what it meant. I don't know why they choose that, but they chose it. They came up with the name.
Why do you open your book, The First 8, A Personal History of the Pioneering Black Congressman Who Helped Shape a Nation, with the story of the Corsairs?
Well, because I think it tells a whole lot about, well, basically who I am. These were young people living on Charleston's east side, the most densely populated area in the state of South Carolina, living in public housing, most of them. No one expected them to ever do much in life, and they became tremendous successes, all 8 of them, as well as their queen.
Congressman Clyburn, was the high school you were teaching at in the early 60s segregated?
Yes, it was, very much so. And it was built to maintain segregation. You had Burke High School on the west side of town. They built this high school on the east side of town to keep from integrating Charleston High School, which was in the middle of town. So it was not just segregated, but it was built to maintain segregation.
Had you been a civil rights activist prior to teaching high school?
Yes, very much so. I started my activism when I was still in junior high school, really. I was 12 years old when I became president of my NAACP Youth Council. And then I went off to college and was on the campus of South Carolina State when the sit-ins got started in February of 1960. And I became one of the 8 people to organize the first sit-in in South Carolina which took place in March of 1960. We came about 6 weeks after the students up at North Carolina A&T.
The South Carolina sit-ins did not get as much attention nationally, did they?
No, they didn't, simply because nobody likes to admit this today, but I know this took place. The guy who was a part of it confided in me. He was a big newspaper man who had been brought to Columbia to reestablish the reputation of the state newspaper, the largest newspaper in Columbia. Well, it had lost all credibility because the publisher of the state newspaper sat down with the governor of South Carolina, who was George Bell Timmerman at the time. They made a pact that they would ignore the political activities taking place in South Carolina that we call the sit-ins, and they lost a lot of credibility for having done that. So the man who was hired to come and help the state newspaper reestablish itself told me the whole story as to what happened to the state newspaper. Because I was in the governor's office at the time, and he sort of decided that I was somebody that needed to know a little more about the politics of South Carolina than I was going to get from the people I was interacting with.
You were working in the governor's office.
I was.
What were you doing?
I was the governor's assistant for human resources. I was on his personal staff. John Carl West brought me on the staff in January of 1971, and I stayed on the staff until October of 1974, when he appointed me to run the state agency.
Where in South Carolina were you born and raised?
I was born in the little town of Sumter, about an hour from Columbia. Sumter is not where the Civil War began. It was named for the same person. Thomas Sumter is the town that it was named for. And Thomas Sumter not only gave the town of Sumter its name, it gave the Carolina Athletic Department its nickname, because Thomas Sumter was called the Fighting Gamecock during the Revolutionary War, and Sumter was named after him. It became the Gamecock City, and the University of South Carolina Athletic Department named all of his teams the Gamecocks.
Through your eyes, what was South Carolina like in the 50s and 60s?
Well, South Carolina was stratified along racial lines in the 1950s.
Were those known rules to everybody?
The rules were known very well. Those of us who were growing up under those rules, our parents did what was necessary, they thought, for us to live to adulthood and not be injured along the way. And so those rules were very clear. My father grew up in them. My father was not allowed an education in the county he was in beyond the 7th grade. My mother talked her father into letting her lead the farm, and she went to the little town of Camden, South Carolina, where she lived in with a family, the Dibbles, a family that became very prominent in Chicago politics and you've gotten to know some of those Dibbles during the Barack Obama administration. My mother lived in with the elder Dibbles back in the 19...
Black family, white family?
They were a black family, but the family owned, Broad Street is the main street in Camden, and that family owned most of the buildings. They didn't run the businesses, but they owned the buildings that those businesses were in. And my mother sort of kept house for them, and they in turn sent her to the little private school across the street, Mather Academy, where I eventually graduated from.
At what point in your life was there an incident or just a realization that the rules didn't seem right to you?
Well, when I was about 8 years old, my dad had a couple of rules in the house. One of them that every morning before breakfast we had to recite a Bible verse. He was a minister. He insisted that we had to do that, and we couldn't say the same one twice. Every evening before retiring to bed, we had to share with him and my mother a current event. We didn't have television, but the newspaper was delivered to our house every afternoon. So you had to read that newspaper in order to share current events with them. And that's what got me all I just got interested with Harry Truman. I remember Harry Truman getting elected president. And I remember the fact that he was not supposed to be elected. Thomas Dewey was supposed to be elected. He had the wealth, he had the name, and here's Harry Truman, lacking in the college education, with a disability, not a composing stature at all, and he won that election. That, to me, it just told me what I could do. And so I've been studying Harry Truman ever since.
Is your book, The First Aid, is it a book about Reconstruction?
Yes, it is, very much so. In fact, I first called the book, before I was first, there were 8. Because so many people think I'm the first African-American to serve in Congress from South Carolina. And someone visited my office one day, made that known to me when they saw these 8 pictures up on my wall. And I kind of jokingly said, oh no, before I was first, there were 8. But then I decided then maybe it would be a good thing to write a book about them. Because I had just released my memoir, and I had been keeping up with the readers of Amazon. They were giving my book 5 stars. So I said, well, maybe I can do a second book, and this will be about them. But I didn't get serious about it, really, until after the 2016 elections. And I started watching things and hearing things. And I remembered from my studies of history when I was a student, that what I was seeing and hearing was reminiscent of what happened after the Civil War. And so that got me kind of interested. And then all of a sudden, the 2020 elections came. And when that happened, and the reaction to the 2020 elections, I saw what was going on up in Michigan, trying to establish a second set of electors, Pennsylvania and other states. And I said, I see this. It's what happened in Florida, South Carolina, Louisiana, just after the Civil War, just after the 1876 presidential election, when these states, these 3 states, my home state being one of them, sent up 2 sets of electors, and the election got thrown into the House of Representatives, which is what they were trying to do on January 6, 2021. And I says, this book is no longer a passion. It is now a project. It's a purpose.
16 African Americans served in Congress during Reconstruction. 8 of them were from South Carolina.
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Well, South Carolina was the state where the Civil War began. It was the state where, for all intents and purposes, Reconstruction began. because after the war was over, the first reading of the Emancipation Proclamation took place in Beaufort, South Carolina. And to me, that was the beginning of Reconstruction. And quite frankly, South Carolina, for all intents and purposes, where Reconstruction ended. Because to me, Reconstruction ended in 1877 when that deal was made between the House of Representatives, that little committee that the House put together, 15-member committee. They voted 8-7 to give those 20 votes in dispute. One of those states in dispute was South Carolina. So South Carolina played such a prominent role in all of this. And then, to me, South Carolina played the critical role in the ending of the Civil War. People may talk about what happened with Grant. Grant was a heck of a general, no question about that. But the other things happened in South Carolina. Robert Smalls, when he absconded the planter, he did that like in May of 1862. And then in August of 1862, he was sitting down here in Washington with Abraham Lincoln, and he got permission from Lincoln to go back and recruit African Americans into that war. And most historians say, but for those soldiers, they're the ones that made the difference in winning and losing that war. Who did that? Robert Smalls. So I just believe South Carolina played a very critical role in both the Revolutionary War and the Civil War.
Well, here's the list of black members of Congress from South Carolina, and it begins with Joseph Rainey, who served for 9 years. Robert Carlos DeLarge served 1 term. Robert Brown Elliott, also 1 term. Richard Harvey Kane served several terms. Alonzo Jacob Rancier, or Rancier? Rancier. Robert Smalls served in Congress from 1875 to 1887. Thomas Ezekiel Miller, George Washington Murray, and then, of course, the longest-serving black congressman from South Carolina is Jim Clyburn, who has been first elected in 1992. Those first 8 congressmen were all Republicans.
Yes, they were. My mother and father were Republicans. Black folks, by and large, were members of the party of Lincoln. And it was that way all the way up, quite frankly, to 1964. In fact, a lot of people don't realize that when the elections were held, Nixon got 28% of the African American vote and was going to get the majority of that vote until Martin Luther King Jr. Was arrested in 1960 and put in the jail down in Georgia. And when that happened, a call was made to King's wife by the soon-to-be president of the United States to change the course of that war. If John F. Kennedy had not made that call, and if Richard Nixon had listened to his advisors, he may have made a similar call, but instead, he would not listen to his biggest advisor at the time was Henry Cabot Lodge, whose father or grandfather played a very critical role in the bringing it in or trying to keep Reconstruction from coming to an end.
And C-SPAN's Q&A podcast continues in a moment. Congressman Clyburn, did you know Martin Luther King?
Very well. Knew King, spent time with King. The first time I met King was the same weekend I met John Lewis, October 1960. The sit-ins had started in February of 1960. We sat in South Carolina in March of 1960. And we met, the students did, in Raleigh, North Carolina, at Shaw University in the spring of 1960. But the sit-ins were getting out of hand. Things were just happening all over the country. And so we thought that we need to be get better organized. So a second meeting of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee took place in Atlanta in October of 1960. And it was October 13th, 14th, and 15th. That's the weekend I first met King, and I met John Lewis at the same time. John and I became fast friends, and of course, we served here in Congress together. But the interesting thing about the meeting with King was it was not, it didn't start off as a pleasant meeting, because King had been advocating disobeying unjust laws and getting arrested for it. And we had to be nonviolent with those arrests. But it's kind of interesting thing, and if you check this, you will find out, as of October 15, 1960, King had never been to jail. He was advocating going to jail, but he had never been. And that caused a little schism in the group. So we asked King for a meeting. He agreed to the meeting. And that weekend, we went into a meeting around 10 o'clock in the evening. We came out of there at 3 or 4 o'clock the next morning. What was supposed to be an hour meeting turned out to be 4 or 5 hour meeting. And I've never been the same. I call that the night my Saul to Paul transformation.
Why?
Because I went in there feeling one way, thinking one way. I came out a totally different person. King had that kind of impact on me. And that's when I started reading everything about King. I did with King like I had done with Truman. I started, and I wrote, when I read his first book, which was Stride Toward Freedom, I started reading all of his books, all of it. Now, his last book was called Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. And I took a lot of stuff today from that, because we are in chaos in this country in search of community.
Do you agree with Martin Luther King's so-called nonviolent approach?
Yes, I do, as a tactic. John Lewis internalized it. Most of us didn't. With me, it was a tactic. And so long as I was participating in the sit-ins, marching, I employed nonviolence. But I don't think I'm totally a nonviolent person. I have never internalized it the way John did.
How so?
Because I think that if someone were to attack me in the name of whatever, I think I'm fighting back.
So going back to Reconstruction, Congressman, these 8 African Americans were elected to the Congress over a period of years. What was the Democratic Party like in South Carolina during that time?
The Democratic Party in South Carolina was a party of, there were a lot of people. The Democratic Party started out as it was a Democratic Republican Party. And it split along the way. And of course, the Republican Party became that part of it that became Republican Party. Abraham Lincoln was their first successful candidate for president. But the others, Jackson, etc., they gave birth to the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party was the pro-slavery part of that party. So the Democratic Republican Party became Democratic and Republican, with the people who were anti-slavery going toward the Republican route. The people who were pro-slavery were Democrats. And so they became so-called the Southern Democrats. And then because this is not well known by a lot of people, but when Abraham Lincoln was elected on the Republican ticket, when he got up for re-election, he was in trouble, and he didn't think he was going to get re-elected. So he formed really a fusion ticket between him and a guy named Andrew Johnson. Johnson was, I think, Tennessee. Johnson was a Southerner. He
And a
owned
slave
slaves.
owner, yeah.
And he was pro-slavery. But he was on the ticket as Lincoln's vice president. So when Lincoln gets assassinated, as vice president, he moved up. And he started to try to undo everything that Lincoln had done, and to include redeem the South. So these, in my book, I don't call them conservative Democrats, because I have a lot of, my parents were conservative. I call them redeemers, because that's what they were, trying to redeem the South to its pre-Civil War days. And so these folks they were supporters of Andrew Johnson. So Andrew Johnson, when he started trying to undo stuff, he got in trouble with the Congress. And Congress impeached him. And it set off a series of one votes matters that I think ought to be instructive today, because when the impeachment went to the Senate failed to convict him by one vote. Then we get to this election of 1876. It gets thrown into the House of Representatives. Why? Because the House of Representatives couldn't figure out what to do. So they have formed a 15-member committee to study the issue, meet with the candidates, and tell them what to do. The 15 committee voted 8-7 to make Rutherford B. Hayes president rather than Samuel Tilden. Now, the interesting thing about that, Samuel Tilden had 184 electoral votes. At the time, he needed 185. He missed it by one vote. The committee voted 8-7 to give 20 disputed votes to Rutherford B. Hayes, who finished the campaign with 165 votes. He gets all 20 of those, he goes to 185. And then he would be elected president by one vote. And that's what happened. They voted 8-7. They give the 20 votes to Rutherford B. Hayes. Hayes then becomes president, 185 to 184, one vote. So when people say one vote won't matter, I tell them all the time, let me tell you something. Lincoln's issues were overturned in large measure because of one vote. I tell them that Reconstruction came to an end by a vote of 8-7 because the deal was cut for Rutherford B. Hayes to bring an end to Reconstruction, 8-7. That made Hayes president of the United States, 185 to 184. And he took the troops out of the South, started Jim Crow by a vote of 185 to 184. All of this happened in every instance by one single vote. That ought to tell people how important one vote is. That one vote meant that between number 8 in this book, George Washington Murray, and number 9, yours truly, there are 95 years.
What do you remember about your primary school education, your high school education, being taught about the Civil War?
Well, the only thing that we were ever taught about the Civil War, because my teachers taught from the textbooks that they were allowed to teach from, which is why when I became a school teacher, I refused to teach from the textbooks. I taught from the evening news and the morning newspapers. the textbook given to me by the schools I use as a reference book. I had enough sense even back then to do that, which was necessary to clear the law. But I taught world history from the living experiences of those students who were in my classroom. And when, I'll never shall forget, when James Gadsden was appointed ambassador, was nominated and approved to be ambassador to Iceland, he called and asked would I come to his swearing in. I was in Congress at the time, but we were out of session. But I came back to Washington to his swearing in, and I noticed when I walked in there, they took me to a place, they had a little spot on the floor that I didn't know it at the time, but James Gadsden had designated that I should stand there. And we took the oath of office, and to give his speech, he asked the audience to take a look at me. And he said, I wish you had spent just 1 hour in his classroom. You would never be the same. He said that I opened his eyes to a world far beyond our show. So he goes off, he leaves that little East Side High School, which became C.A. Brown High School, and he goes to Harvard University of undergrad, and he goes to Stanford to become for the Foreign Service. And he began ambassador to Iceland from east side of Charleston, South Carolina. Interesting.
Congressman, are you old enough to have known descendants of Confederates in South Carolina?
Yes, sure. Quite a few of them. There's one that's very important to Brown v. Board of Education. Thomas Waring was a grandson, a great-grandson of a Confederate soldier who became a federal judge who had managed the gubernatorial campaign for a segregationist governor. But he had himself a transformation. And in the course of the case of Briggs v. Elliott, which was the South Carolina case that became one of the 5 cases that became Brown v. Board of Education, he wrote a dissenting opinion in that case. There's a 3-judge panel. They voted 2-1 to maintain segregation. Thomas Waiters Waring, J. Waiters Waring, it was his name. He dissented in that case. And J. Waiters Waring was a descendant of a Confederate soldier. And he was ostracized in Charleston for it, and he eventually left Charleston. And he and Reverend J. Delane, who organized the people who filed a petition to desegregate the schools in South Carolina, the 2 of them became reacquainted up in New York. And in Buffalo, New York, today, there is an AME church that's called Delane Waring AME Church. And I've been to that church. I've spoken at that church, and I'm going back to that church.
I don't mean to keep harping on this, but for those of us who didn't experience this, what was daily life like under segregation?
Well, it's not any different from the way life is today, except that you stayed within certain boundaries. Communities were very rigidly segregated in most places, but not every place. Charleston, for instance, they had segregated schools, but black and white people lived basically, in many instances, next door to each other. But they would walk out the doors, and one would go to Burke High School, the other would go to the Charleston High School. And after the 1954 9-0 Supreme Court decision that outlawed segregation in the public schools, it's when things began. A lot of white people fled the Charleston Peninsula and moved out to what's now Mount Pleasant. They went west of there, actually, to James Island. They didn't much go to Johns Island. At the time, Johns Island was basically the Black Island. But they just left. Now coming back. When I left Charleston to go to Columbia in 1970, I really moved to Columbia in 72, started working in the governor's office in 71. Columbia had 12 council people, 6 black and 6 white. It was around 44% black. Today, I say Columbia, I meant Charleston. Charleston is now about 21% black.
21%?
Yes.
You also report in the first 8 that 40% of all enslaved people came through Charleston port,
yes.
the port of Charleston.
Yes.
Was slavery the reason, one of the main reasons that Charleston was a very economically vibrant city in the antebellum period?
Absolutely. The enslaved Africans that came into South Carolina went first down to Barbados, and they brought with them skills. This whole stuff about, we call rice Carolina gold. That's what rice is called, because that was the basis of South Carolina's wealth. The skill involved in growing rice came from Africa. These enslaved Africans brought that skill with them. And when they ran out of land down in Barbados, they came up to Charleston looking to grow rice. And that's what they did. And rice became the basis of South Carolina's economy. And South Carolina was a very, very wealthy state. I would say, though some may argue with this, I would say Charleston or South Carolina could have been definitely at least the 3rd wealthiest state in the Union at the time.
You tell an interesting story about the history of Hilton Head Island, a resort that many of us have been to and enjoyed.
Sure. I sometimes marvel at why people would not know that black folks didn't own plantations. If you go to Hilton Head Island, you say, where do you? Well, I live on the Hilton Head plantation. I live on the Sea Pines plantation. Oh, yeah? So what black person owned a plantation? No. There were black people who lived on the northern part of that island. But after, these were where rice was grown. Hilton Head was granted by a king of England. So this whole thing that people go around talking about, say, well, black folks used to own all of Hilton Head. That's not true. Those Sea Pines was a plantation. There was the Hilton Head plantation. There was the Indigo plantation. These were plantations.
And C-SPAN's Q&A podcast continues in a moment. In your book, you write that you have a, quote, special kinship with George Washington Murray.
Yes.
The last of the 8, the original 8 black congressmen. Why?
Well, when I was growing up, there were all kinds of rumors floating around about who my relatives were. My dad's favorite uncle was Uncle Enoch, E-N-O-C-H. My father's first name was Enos, E-N-O-S. But they're both biblical names. And he used to visit Uncle Enoch a whole lot. And Uncle Enoch's wife was a Murray. Now, when I was running for Congress in 1992, I was asked to speak for a Family and Friends Day at one of my family churches, St. Matthew's United Methodist Church, in an area of Kershaw County, where my father's mother grew up, Phoebe Lloyd. Her brother was Enoch Lloyd, my dad's favorite uncle. Well, one day when I was about to speak at this service, my cousin said to me, I'm running now, I had my brochures in my hand. And he just put his finger on the brochure. He said, this is going to be very historic. I said, yeah, if I get elected to Congress, it'll be the first African-American since 1897. He said, no, that's not what I mean. I said, what do you mean? You remember do you know who the last one was? I said, yeah, George Washington Murray. He said, did you know he was family? I said, no, I didn't know that. He says, well, he was. And my mother lived, or grandmother lived with them. So he says, ask Mama, she'll be here soon. Well, it turned out his mother wasn't feeling well that day and she didn't come. But later that night, I called her and told her what I had heard her son, Johnny, had just told me. And she was real evasive on the phone. So I thought that maybe I called her too late, and I'll wait and call her back the next day. So I ended the conversation, and a couple of days later I called her back. And I told her why I wanted the answers to these questions. And she cut me off. She said, now, James, back then, a lot of things happened without the benefit of marriage, and wouldn't talk anymore. And so I just dropped it. Didn't bother with it anymore. Years later, or it was much later, when I first got inkling of it, an attorney from Sumter, on election day, the general election of 1992, I walk into this polling place in Sumter just to shake hands with people, and this attorney was sitting there as a Republican poll watcher, Attorney Hogue, H-O-G-G. He came over to me and asked me to stop by his book before I leave. And so I did. And he says, I'm a Republican and I'm supporting your opponent, but you're going to win this election. And you won't be the first South Carolinian or first Sumterite to serve in Congress. He said, do you know that? I said, yeah, I know. George Washington Murray was from Sumter. He said, yeah. I want you to read this book. He gave me the name of the book. And as I walked away, he says, some of my research tell me that you might be related to him. And that ended it. And until I started doing this book, I never revisited that.
And have you confirmed that you are related to George Washington Murray?
No, I haven't. I've had two groups looking into my father's mother and how she got the name Clyburn. They have not been able to find it. And I've got Skip Gates from up at Harvard. His group is now, Skip swears they're going to be able to find it. So he'll be the third group that I've paid to try to tell me exactly who my father's father was. I have not been able to find it.
When you write about Robert Carlos DeLarge and Alonzo Rancière, you call them mulattoes.
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, Smalls was a mulatto as well, and so was Joseph Rainey. That means that they were of mixed race, and I say in the beginning of the book that I use that word sparingly because some people get real nervous about it, the word, but all but two. Well, I shouldn't say that. One was not African American at all. Number 7 was Thomas Miller. Thomas Miller was born out of wedlock. And according to my research, he was the grandson of Thomas Heyward, one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. But he was adopted by an African American family, and they moved to Charleston. He chose to live as African American, but by blood, my research says that he was full-blooded white. He was not African American at all. So mulatto simply means mixed race.
Was that a major distinction at that time?
Yes, it was.
Light skin, dark skin?
In fact, there's a whole part of the book that I call colorism. And it may make some people nervous to read about it, but it's true. If you look at the elections, the campaigns between Robert Smalls and George Washington Murray, that campaign turned on skin color. And George Washington Murray wasn't the first one to use it. It was used against Robert Smalls more than once. And Murray succeeded in getting Smalls out of the race. And of course, then Murray defeated Miller. But Miller was taken as being mulatto, but he wasn't. But it was all, both those races turned on skin color.
Of the 8, most were born free,
Yeah.
which I guess surprised me a little bit, given the age
Yeah.
in the state.
Yeah, a lot of people were there. Like, for instance, Richard Kane. Richard Kane came to South Carolina, a free man. He was never enslaved. He was born in West Virginia, educated in Ohio, started, his second job as a minister was in New York. Now, Joseph Rainey was really born enslaved, but his father purchased the family's freedom at a very early age. Robert Elliott moved to South Carolina from Massachusetts, had been educated in England there. In fact, if I had to bet on it and the people would do the real research, I don't think he was eligible to be a member of Congress, because I'm not too sure that he was really born in the United States. But he claimed to have been born in Massachusetts, and no one ever, he said he got injured fighting in the war, but nobody's been able to prove that he ever really served and was really, because he had a little limp or something that he put on a war injury, but I don't think that ever really happened. So when you go through all of this, it's kind of interesting, but you're right.
Well, one of the things you do in the first state is you make connections.
Yes.
To you and to your political career. I want to play just a little bit of video, and you'll understand what it is.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost,
Congressman, what's the connection to your book and to yourself?
Well, it's kind of interesting. This was at the funeral of one of the Emmanuel 9, that young man who was being funeralized at this moment was one of my first interns. He interned in my office, and right off to the right of Barack Obama there was a woman, Vashti McKenzie, who became the first woman to be an AME bishop. And she wrote one of the blurbs for this book. So that is pretty emotional.
Where were you in that room, in that sanctuary?
I was sitting with Hillary Clinton, just a few, on the first row in the church.
Richard Harvey Kane, one of the 8,
Yes.
was connected to Mother Emanuel as well, correct?
Yes.
Was that his church, or he started building that church?
Yes.
Did
No,
I get
the
that
church.
right?
The church was burned down because of the Denmark Vesey insurrection of 1822, and Kane was sent to Charleston by the AME Church to rebuild Emmanuel, and he successfully did so. So much so until the church got too big, and he opened a second church a few blocks away, Morris Brown AME Church. He named after one of the former pastors of Emmanuel, who had become the second bishop of the AME Church. So Richard Kane also was a newspaperman.
Like you?
Yes. And then he was the founder of the town of Lincolnville. That town still exists today. Very sort of a bedroom community for Charleston, and they named it after Abraham Lincoln.
Another one of the original 8, Robert Brown Elliott, who served from 1871 to 1874. When writing about him, you say out loud in your book that you take offense that they talk about the Clyburn machine in South Carolina,
Yeah.
and how impactful it has been over the years. Why do you take offense to that?
Because I think it lessens the intellect that people like Robert Brown Elliott demonstrated. In fact, he was not from South Carolina, as I said earlier. He went to South Carolina. He got elected to the legislature, and he served as Speaker of the House in South Carolina. And he did not get defeated from Congress. He resigned from Congress and went back because he was upset over the corruption that was taking place in government. He wanted corruption out of it. So he gave up his seat in Congress, went back to South Carolina to fight the corruption. And you will see, even when it got so bad, he lost his battles on that corruption stuff, but he never gave up fighting the corruption. And his law partner said of him that he knew almost everybody of any consequence in South Carolina. He went around the state. He really developed those relationships. He didn't have a machine. What he had was enough intelligence to build the relationships that were necessary to become a good politician. I never created any kind of machine. I just, like Elliot, developed the relationships, and I still work on developing those relationships.
Well, even the back of your book, in the blurb, it calls you a kingmaker.
Yeah.
Why do you think you've got this influence? Obviously, in 2020, the Joe Biden factor. Why do you think you have all this influence?
Well, I'd listen. And one of the people I listened to was my late wife, who said to me, Emily said to me back in 2020, she says, if we really want to win this election, be better to nominate Joe Biden. And so when Joe Biden got in all kinds of trouble, and I asked my daughters, because Emily passed away in 2019, and of course the election was 2020. They had this big debate coming up in February of 2020, and everybody was looking to me for to see what kind of endorsement I was going to make. And quite frankly, I didn't know what to do because Joe Biden had just lost 3 states and 3 races, and he was not going, wasn't looking good in South Carolina. And so I asked my daughters, I said, what do you think I should do? And they said, listen to mama. And that was almost in unison. Listen to mama. And so when I gave that endorsement, I quite frankly just imagined that Emily was there. In fact, I was looking over at 2 of my daughters who were sitting off to my right, and for some reason they sat with a seat, empty chair in front of them, in between the 2 of them. And I looked over and saw the empty seat. I just put Emily in that seat. And I gave an endorsement extemporaneously that people said made all the difference.
There are 7 members of Congress in the House of Representatives from South Carolina, 1 Democrat, 6 Republicans. How do you get along with Nancy Mace and Ralph Norman and Joe Wilson, et cetera, et cetera?
I get along famously with Joe Wilson, okay with Nancy Mace. Don't get along too well with Ralph Norman. Ralph is a part of that so-called Freedom Caucus, and for some strange reason, he thinks that because Republicans get 52, 53% of the vote in South Carolina, they are deserving of 100% of the representation. I don't know how you do that. It would seem to me. And you know, one of the things people find out about me, if they care to look it up, I started advocating for proportional representation way back as a 20-something-year-old. I've written editorials, op-ed pieces for the Charleston papers on things like proportional voting, cumulative voting, which we used to have. If you go and check, you see Illinois had cumulative voting up to a few years ago. The Supreme Court, in many cases, accepted cumulative voting as a way to settle voting rights cases. And I still advocated that proportional voting. Now, people have started in some places like New York what they call ranked choice voting, but that's not the only way. The cumulative voting is the way to do it. Proportional voting is the way to do it. So ranked choice seems to have caught people's fancy, but I would really believe that the Justice Department and the Congress itself would do well to look at something other than winner-take-all elections, because I think there's something untoward about you getting 50% plus 1 of the vote, and then you get 100% of the power of the office. There's something that's not quite right about that to me.
Could you see the state of South Carolina, Republican governor, Republican legislature, redistrict your district, which runs from Columbia to Charleston?
Oh yeah, I can see it happening. I don't think it will, simply because most people in South Carolina, at least the political leadership in South Carolina, don't see it that way. In fact, I would be very surprised if the legislature were to do that.
Are you going to run again?
I have not decided yet. The daughters and I will have. I have 3 daughters. We meet every year, the Friday before Christmas, and we stay together until New Year's Day, and we call that our annual meeting. And we've been doing that since 1972. And it's at that during that holiday that's coming up We'll talk about the future, we'll talk about the past, and then I'll make my decision based upon the substance of those conversations.
The First Eight is the name of the book, a personal history of the pioneering black congressman who helped shape a nation. We ran out of time. We didn't get to talk about Robert Smalls, who stole a Confederate ship, ran it past Fort Sumter, met with Abraham Lincoln, and spent 13 or so years in Congress. You'll have to read the book if you want to learn about Robert Smalls. Congressman Jim Clyburn, Democrat of South Carolina, the 9th member of Congress, black member of Congress from South Carolina. Thanks for spending an hour with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, next week on the Q&A podcast, our guest is former NBA star and human rights advocate Enes Kanter Freedom, who has written a book about his NBA career, his coming of age in the U.S., and his human rights fights with Turkey, China, and the NBA.